Good evening, all you ghouls and gals. Welcome to the Booze and Bourbon Halloween Spooktacular. It's almost that time of year. Everybody loves to celebrate their fears. But I'll tell you what scares me the most. The podcast filled with ghouls and ghouls. A little bourbon may be good right now. I think a drink may calm me down. I know everybody's scared of me, but this podcast is terrifying. Ooh. It's the Booze and Bourbon Podcast. Halloween October Spooktacular.
Welcome back. It's the Halloween October Spooktacular.
Ooh, that wasn't a very good one. Sorry.
Hey, I'm Kim.
And I'm Jen.
And we are here to spook you today. So, since it's October and we're doing this really fun Halloween kind of feel, we got something real cool to talk about today.
I'm just going to say bloodsuckers.
Bloodsuckers?
We'll go with vampires, yeah. In New Orleans,
Woohoo!
Louisiana.
It's so exciting. Love it. Yeah, I hope you guys really like this episode too, because I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into the research, which takes me to a certain topic, top of mind.
Yeah.
So when I was doing research, I always tend to fall into a rabbit hole of research.
Yes.
And I'm sure you do too when you're finding stories and stuff.
You get off track sometimes.
Yeah, so I fell down a slippery rabbit hole, and it was about this lady named Georgette, and she always does YouTube videos with her opossums. And in one, she gets telepathic messages from Pearl the Dead Squirrel and sends the messages to her opossums. Where do I come up with this stuff?
Oh my God. It just shocked me that those type of videos actually exist on there.
She's been doing YouTube for 10 years.
And there's obviously a lot of followers then.
She's got 67,000 subscribers or something.
I want to know the people that actually listen to that on a regular basis and will watch that.
Look, you're looking at one now.
Oh, Kim.
What's going on with you this week? Have any good stories?
I don't know if I would say this is good, but...
Is it terrifying?
No, it's just disturbing.
Okay, I'm here for it.
My dog tends to eat things that he shouldn't.
Uh-huh.
And apparently that was yesterday.
Okay.
And he was out there. I watched him do his little thing in the yard where he sniffs around, finds a spot, takes a dump.
Mm-hmm. As dogs do.
That happened. But then he kind of squat waddled forward a bit, tried again, did it again. So he repeatedly was squatting all over the yard. And then I could see him really struggling, and he was dragging his ass on the grass. So I'm like, oh, great. So there's something in there that's just not...
oh, God.
Not coming out. So... being the good dog owner that I am, I put a glove on.
Oh, thank God.
And then put a Sobeys bag on my hand on top of the glove and
double
grabbed
up the
some
protection.
paper towel and went out and chased him down because, he doesn't really like people touching him.
Who does?
Yeah. So I bear wrestled the dog down and then had to wipe his ass because he had some sort of string dangling.
Was it tooth floss or something, or dental floss?
It was it looked like what I tried to sew up a pillow with, so I'm assuming he ripped that pillow again, probably, and ate the thread.
Wow. He's really smart.
He's something, all right. I don't know if I was going to say smart, but...
Wow.
Something.
Well, I'm sorry that you're tainted. I'll go easy on you on the would you rather questions later.
No.
Okay, well,
Do you have any that you want to share?
I was just going to say, yeah, I have a pet story as well.
Great.
It doesn't involve poop, but it involves me being terrified because my cat, Dexter, who's completely an indoor cat, decided that he was going to go do some night crawling. And we live in an area where there are tons of raccoons, coyotes, lots of different wildlife. So yeah, don't know really what time he got out, but I think he was gone for about a 12-hour tour. And 5 o'clock in the morning, his cat brother was screaming, so woke me up, and there he was on the front doorstep, just laying in a blanket.
Having a snooze.
Yeah.
He had a good night out. He was on a bit of a bender there.
I was terrified. but he's fine. He's fine, and he still wants to go outside. So
Dexter's a savage. I feel like he's just, I don't think he would ever, be harmed because he's just.
I know, but see, our old dog that passed away, Dakota, kind of looks like a coyote. So I fear that Dexter would be like, "Oh, it's my brother," and then run over to him and try to make friends with the coyote. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, It's been a week. Let's just say that.
All right.
Okay, so we have this bourbon here in front of us, and we chose this bourbon specifically because it looks like there's blood dripping from the top.
It does. It is really cool.
Yeah, so it's a Maker's Mark. It is Maker's Mark cask strength, so it's 110 proof, almost 111 proof. We got this when I was in Ohio. I picked this ditty up. It's delicious. Jen, I'll let you do the cork pop here.
Thank you.
I thought you were strong. That's
There we
a
go.
good cork pop.
It took me a minute.
Fill me up, Jenny.
All right, Kim. Here you go. Warm up the bourbon pocket.
Thank you so very much.
That was a healthy, generous pour.
It was great. So we have had a few listeners that don't necessarily drink bourbon but want to try it. Mm-hmm. So Jen, when we go to try a new bourbon, what's the first thing that we usually do? Give it a good little sniff.
Sniff.
And when you're sniffing it, make sure you leave your mouth open just a little bit so you don't burn the nose hairs. If you leave your mouth open a little bit, get your nose right in there. Typically, you're going to probably smell vanilla, caramel,
All the like lovely sweet
oakiness
senses of desserts sometimes.
Exactly. I always feel like bourbon smells like dessert. And then you're going to put it in your mouth and you're going to swish it around just a little bit. And then you can finish it off with a Kentucky Chew. That's a Kentucky Chew. It really brings up the flavors, though, honest to God.
It does.
Yeah. So this is delicious bourbon. It's hot. It's definitely hot.
Spicy hot
But,
tamale.
like, it's got some serious legs on it.
It does.
It's really sweet.
It actually, it really does.
Really sweet, really spicy, and it's really delicious. It's got a nice color to it
I
as
think
well.
that's why I like so many, like, because of the caramel kind of, it's like having a little treat, but then you get a little bit
Absolutely.
of a kick to it. Mm-hmm. A
Yeah.
little spicy punch.
Yeah. So that's really, if you don't know how to sip bourbon, definitely swish it around in your mouth so it coats your whole mouth so you can kind of release a little bit of the bourbon, but really get that good mouthfeel on it too. Yeah. So that's our recommendations. Anyway.
Back to the bloodsuckers.
So now is about time for Would You Rather? Jen, would you like to go first or would you like me to go first?
You go ahead.
Okay. So say you were living in New Orleans.
Yes.
And you're walking home from a late night and you peek around the corner and you think you saw a vampire. Mm-hmm. Would you rather the vampire be like your typical old-timey looking vampire with like count sort of ambiance going on? Or would you rather be completely unsuspecting and be like this kind of like cute, like 19, 20, 21-year-old girl?
Oh.
Would you rather encounter a girl that's a vampire, that's young and not so typical looking, or the count kind of look, the count vibe?
Well, I think I'm going to go with the girl. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Don't really have an answer that's not going to come off sideways and dirty. So
Okay.
I'm just going to say, if I'm going to go down, let's correct that. If she's going to go down. If anybody's going down. I'm just kidding. I would rather it be the cute young girl than the disgustingly old, decrepit looking.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you,
Bloodsucker.
actually. Yeah, unsuspecting. And then, like, your stress levels aren't high and your heart probably isn't beating out of your chest. Maybe they could hear your heart beating more. You wouldn't be as...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they do hear that really well, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Yes, they do.
Okay.
All right.
On to the next. Mine's not going to be that exciting.
Okay.
So, based on my story I told earlier, would you rather have to barehanded pull something out of my dog's ass?
Oh, my God. Or yours?
Yes.
No.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to ask
No,
you.
you weren't.
What if I was in distress?
Oh my God.
Both of us are in distress. Who are you going to pull it out of?
I feel like with your dog, it wouldn't be as personal. And if I had to
normally
like,
does eat the same thing, so it always looks exactly the same.
you eat threads too.
I don't eat threads. But I mean,
I feel like I would be okay until maybe there was a moment of eye contact, and then I'd be like, Jen, I can't do this anymore. You just looked at me.
we need to look back at it to a whole other level, and I'm like, Kim, hurry up, it hurts. Sorry, I had to take it offside there for a second.
Yeah, I think I'd have to go with your dog. I'm
All
sorry.
right, fine.
The eye contact wouldn't
I'm
be
gonna
as
have to do it
awkward.
myself.
Sorry. Okay, guys, right after the break, we're going to get back into the rest of our episode, which is all about vampires in New Orleans. Stay tuned. So if you mention the word vampire to most people, they're likely to envision the Transylvanian nobleman Count Dracula, Jen, just like what you envisioned.
In the street corner.
Dark alleyway,
New Orleans, yeah.
nested in his dark place in the mountaintops. This image of vampires is from a very long time ago. But the home of the modern vampire is undoubtedly New Orleans, the state capital of Louisiana, and the place where a vibrant melting pot of religious beliefs, cultures, and languages has emerged to create an exotic backdrop for the myth, or maybe not myth, of the American vampire. This is thanks in no small measure to the New Orleans-born novelist Anne Rice, who penned the best-selling Vampire Chronicles, a series of modern Gothic novels made famous by the very first installment, the Louisiana set Interview with the Vampire. First published in 1976, it finds a vampire, Louis de Pointe-du-Lac, telling the story of his life to a reporter and how in 1791 he was turned into a vampire by the charismatic Lestat de Liancourt. In the book, Rice describes the city vividly as a perfect environment for vampires. This was New Orleans, a magical and magnificent place to live, in which a vampire richly dressed and gracefully walking through the pools of light of one gas lamp to another might attract no more notice in the evening than hundreds of other exotic creatures. The book was actually written as Rice was grieving over the death of her 6-year-old daughter, Michelle, from the terribly unselective disease leukemia. It's thought that Rice created the child vampire Claudia in the book mostly as a coping mechanism. Though initially rejected by many publishers, it was eventually signed and became a bestseller. And then in 1994, made into a Hollywood film with Tom Cruise as Lestat and Brad Pitt as Louis. Writer Charlene Harris set her Southern Vampire Mysteries, which were adapted for the series True Blood, in the fictional town of Bontemps, Louisiana, creating echoes of the sticky heat of New Orleans and keeping her vampires most definitely Southern. Sookie Stackhouse even travels to New Orleans in the book Definitely Dead, which she describes as the city of night. Meanwhile, 2009's Cirque du Freak, the Vampire Assistant, adapted from Darren Shan's Vampire Blood trilogy, was shot in New Orleans and in neighboring Baton Rouge. Other writers to have embraced the notion of the Southern vampire are New Orleans-born Poppy Z. Bright, whose debut Lost Souls finds it in a cast of vampires, and Jewel Gomez with her The Gilda Stories, also hailing from Louisiana. But no one has taken the idea of New Orleans being the vampire capital of the U.S. more to their hearts than the people of the city themselves. There's the Vampire Film Festival, which takes place in October, while the Boutique de Vampire at 633 Toulouse Street has been described as the Macy's of all things Netherworld and sells vampire wines and even a vampire hot sauce. If you're in the city in October, you can hit up Endless Night, which is a sumptuous vampire ball. It all fits remarkably well with the city's history of embracing the not-so-well-known beliefs of voodoo, black magic, and the supernatural. Their cemeteries are known as Cities of the Dead, as from the times of the early settlers in the 1800s, bodies could not be buried in the ground due to the high water table. As the coffins would fill with water and float, they had to build above-ground mausoleums instead. With such imagery, it's hardly surprising that Rice was inspired in the way that she was to make New Orleans the grand central station of vampires, a great place for them to live out a very, very, very long life. We can't completely give Anne Rice all of the credit, as there's some very well-versed legends about vampires actually living in New Orleans historically, and we're going to tell you about 3 well-known vampire stories that have emerged over the last couple of centuries.
Starting off with Count Saint-Germain. Vampire stories stretch back to France in the illustrious 1700s, where there was a mysterious man who charmed the courts of Europe. The Count de Saint-Germain was a very strange and extraordinary character. He was a master of the piano and the violin, could converse in 6 different languages, and his skills as a conversationalist were unrivaled. His wealth was unfathomable. He carried gems around in his clothing, and no one knew how he came into such wealth. No one knew anything about his family, where he came from, or who he was. He did, according to some accounts, claim to be a son of Francis Rakoczy, Prince of Transylvania. One of his greatest passions was alchemy, and he was believed to have an extraordinary talent for maintaining his youth. Perhaps it was his vast knowledge of cosmetics and herbs that kept him young. The philosopher Voltaire called him the man who knows everything and who never dies. No one really knew his true age. He looked about 40 in all of his portraits and continued to appear so for over a half a century. Although he was charming, engaging, and graced the dinner tables of many dukes and kings, no one had ever seen him eat anything. He would only sip his wine exquisitely and ramble on about everything from history to chemistry. There was such speculation about the Count's lineage and immense wealth, which resulted in a development of many myths and legends about his background. He is considered by some to have mastered immortality, as many have claimed to have seen him since his death in 1784. And then, fast forward to New Orleans, Louisiana, and there appears a man by the name of Jacques Saint-Germain in the early 20th century. He fits every description of the Count, around 40 years of age, with heavy money bags, the most fascinating of dinner guests, and still a complete mystery. He would throw lavish parties and invite the elite, and everyone would sit enveloped in the conversation and delicious food. But curiously enough, the Jacques would never eat a morsel, only sip his wine. One night, several months after moving to New Orleans, he had a lady stay a bit late. Out on his balcony, at the corner of the Ursuline and Royal Streets, the Saint-Germain grabbed her and tried to bite her neck. She escaped by falling from the balcony, survived the fall, and then reported the incident to the police. When the police came to investigate, Saint-Germain had vanished. They searched his apartment and found tablecloths with large splotches of blood on them. They searched the kitchen, where they found no sign of food or evidence that food had ever been there.
Oh my God.
All they found were bottles of wine, and after pouring themselves a glass, drinking it, and then spitting it out, they discovered that it was not only wine in those bottles, it was wine mixed with human blood.
That's crazy.
Oh, lovely. It is unclear whether the Count and Jacques are the same person, but believers speculate that they are. To this day, the mysterious figure of the Count Saint-Germain has his own occult following. Although he allegedly died in the year 1784, no one saw his death, and some claim to have seen him many years afterward.
That's really creepy. That's really creepy.
Even gross when you take a big chug of that wine and realize it's not all wine.
This tastes really irony.
Yeah.
Why?
Interesting.
Metallic wine.
Yes.
Then we have John and Wayne Carter. In terms of murder rates, New Orleans ranks amongst the highest. It has always been a notorious place for missing persons. That is, it is a place where people just disappear and no one ever knows what happened to them. That's because they're all drinking in the pubs and having a good time, listening to music and just being all drunk and stuff. Going to find out the latest voodoo man, going to check out the vampires in the cemeteries, the city of dead.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We just really went off there on a tangent. It's all right. I also burped.
No, congratulations. John and Wayne Carter were brothers. They seemed to be normal in every aspect. They both had normal manual jobs down by the docks, by the river, and lived in the French Quarter. It was the late 1920s, early 30s, during the Great Depression, and times were hard, so a man worked all he could to put in some long and strenuous days. One would need to do their very best to obtain a healthy diet. One day, a girl was reported to have escaped from the Carter brothers' apartment, and she ran to the authorities. Her wrists were cut, not enough to cause immediate death, but enough to cause her blood to drain slowly over the next several days. The policeman ran into the Carters' third-story apartment on the 800th block of Royal Street and found 4 other people tied to chairs with their wrists sliced in the same fashion. Some had been there for many days. The story was that the brothers had abducted these people in order to drink their blood at the end of every day when they came home from work. Police also found the speculated total of 14 dead bodies. Oh. The cops waited for the brothers to return, and when they did, it took 8 of them to hold down the 2 average-sized men. That's what a diet of blood will do to you.
Yeah.
A few years later, when the Carters were finally executed, their bodies were placed in a New Orleans vault. Cemeteries in New Orleans are quite picturesque. And like I said before, they're not only more ornate than the rest of the nations, but they enter many generations of one family inside one vault. The hot temperatures create a perfect environment for cremation by Mother Nature. As time goes on, and sometimes with a little help by caretakers, the remains sift down into the bottom of the vault, and when it is all rubble, a new body is slid inside. A few years after the Carter brothers' death, when the caretakers were placing another Carter in the family vault, they discovered that the vault was completely empty. No John or Wayne. They were gone. No remains were found at the bottom of the vault. To this day, many sightings have occurred in the French Quarter that match the descriptions of these 2 brothers almost exactly. Years later, an owner of their apartment saw 2 figures that matched their descriptions outside on the balcony, whispering to one another. Both figures jumped off of the top of the 3rd-story balcony and took off running. The legend goes that if a vampire drinks your blood 7 nights in a row, then and only then can you become a vampire. Some of those found in the Carter's brothers' apartment had been there for more than 7 days. One warped fellow named Philippe went on to become a notorious serial killer. And of course, he would do more than just kill his victims. He was believed to drink the blood of all 32 of his victims.
Oh, wow. That is really creepy, though. Can we find out where the apartment was? And then, like...
It's all I know is it's on the 800th block of Royal Street.
I'm sure you could ask. People would know.
Oh, I'm sure they would. I'm sure we could go on a vampire tour. There's
We're going to
tons
add that
from
to our
there.
list of things. New Orleans.
Daily activities are just ramping up here.
All right. We're going to move on to my squad here, the Casket Girls.
Your squad!
They arrived in 1728. The port of New Orleans bustled with activity. The shouting of men, the stamping hooves of the horses, the scraping of boxes as the ships were unloaded. For the group of young women aboard the ship, La Nouvelle Orleans was a taste of the forbidden, of the unknown. The women were ushered down the wooden plank onto the barren ground. To their chest, they each clutched a coffin-shaped cassette or small chest that held all of their belongings. After nearly 6 months traversing the rough waters of the Atlantic Ocean, the young women were eager to make their arrival. They were eager and perhaps a bit nervous about their welcome. Handpacked by the Bishop of Quebec.
Handpicked.
Oh my God, handpacked.
They were packed by hands into this tiny ship.
Handpicked by the Bishop of Quebec, an order given by the French king, the young women were all of appropriate age and background. On their agenda was only one thing, to make a good match and marry one of the French colonists inhabiting the budding Louisiana colony. Upon the sight of them, however, rumors began to circulate throughout the town. Palais, the Frenchmen all muttered to themselves as they spotted the women meant to become their brides. So very pale were the girls that their skin reddened and blistered within moments of enduring the hot subtropical sun. This is probably because they hadn't seen the light of day in months because of traveling by ship. Clutching their casket-shaped chests in tight grips, the young women, the Casket Girls, as they became known, were brought into their new home. Until their respective marriages, they were to remain under the care and the protection of the Ursuline nuns. The fate of the Casket Girls was not as expected. The local men in the French Quarter gravely disrespected the women. Some were placed into unwanted marriages, only to be mistreated by their husbands. Others, upon finding themselves alone and unwed, were forced into prostitution. The French king had enough. He demanded the girls return to France. The sisters of the Ursuline convent then took the casket-shaped chest that had once carried everything that the Casket Girls had owned and climbed the steps to the 3rd floor of the convent, located at 1112 Charter Street. I don't know why I couldn't say that. The windows and door to the 3rd floor had always been sealed shut, and just as I suspected, they were sealed up now. When the nuns got some assistance to open the doors, and they had finally returned to the 3rd floor, the nuns found that the chests were completely empty. They spared no section of the 3rd floor during their search, though the belongings were never recovered. Fearing that the young women might have been something other than what they had said they were, The Ursuline nuns spared no expense in making sure that nothing ever left that third-floor space. The doors were bolted shut, the nails to the windows were blessed by the Pope himself and locked in place. The whispering began all over again about the Casket Girls, but this time they added one more word to their description: vampire. Then in 1978, 2 paranormal investigators seeking answers to whether the Casket Girls had in fact been vampires camped out directly in front of the old Ursuline convent at 1112 Charter Street. They had been previously kicked off the property itself for loitering, but decided to stay the night and see if they experienced anything right outside the walls themselves. Then, hours passed, trickling by minute, so slow was it that sleep overtook them, and in their slumber they failed to notice the third floor's shutters, the same ones which had been locked and shut with blessed nails. Open and shut, open and shut. The recording cameras whirled to a stop as the scene faded to black. The next morning, the bodies of the investigators were found. Their bodies had been torn open, ravaged as if by claws of an animal, their bodies drained of blood. The researcher indicates that these legends are unsupported by historical evidence and are just that, legends. It is unclear or when the myth of the Casket Girls began, but the story continues to haunt tourists and vampire believers to this day.
Okay. Well, that's no way to go out, especially if you're a paranormal investigator. They just wanted the truth. Damn it.
And they were sleeping, too.
I know.
It's rude.
So rude. So I'm sure a lot of our listeners right now may be asking, are vampires real?
Yeah. Are they?
Well, sort of. So clinical vampirism has been recognized as a neurological disease in which those with symptoms drink human blood, believing it to be beneficial for their health. Psychologists have said that symptoms begin with incidences in childhood that draw a sexual connection to the ingestion of blood. This interest in blood results the individual in drinking their own blood and eventually that of other humans or even animals.
Disgusting. Are there real vampire communities in New Orleans?
Yes. So what's crazy is that a man by the name of John Edgar Browning, a PhD candidate at Louisiana State University, actually conducted research in New Orleans that determined there were about 50 individuals who identified as vampires living in New Orleans alone. Many of the real vampires of New Orleans have fangs or are nocturnal. Research has indicated that these markers are cultural, but the vampires insist they are biological. And then there was another study by the Atlanta Vampire Alliance, which is crazy that that's a thing. They had reported about 5,000 of these individuals in all of the United States. There's even those who self-identify as vampires and have their own organization in New Orleans known as NOVA, the New Orleans Vampire Association. The organization accepts all paradigms or denominations of sorts of those who identify as vampires. Crazy.
Well, I got some info here on the New Orleans Vampire Association.
Sweet. Let's hear it.
NOVA, which is a catchy name given we're in Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia.
NOVA is actually governed by a council in which members of 7 houses serve as sectors of denominations reflecting various aspects of NOVA's community values. Within NOVA, there were near equal numbers of men and women, and the members were between ages of 18 and 50. The association was formed in 2005 after Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans. Members participate in charitable events such as serving food to the homeless and hosting silent auctions. Unfortunately, their website is not currently maintained and is not clear whether they are still in operation.
Do you think that they're feeding the homeless? So
Well,
they
I was
have
just saying, I'm like thinking that, like, what? So you're feeding the homeless so that you can then later go out and sample or plump them up or...
So if you are part of NOVA and you're listening to this, we would love for you to email us and tell us.
Can we come to a council meeting as well? I would like to know some things.
Yeah. All right. So we really hope that you guys enjoyed that episode today. So it pretty much concludes today's storytelling. So if you like this episode, go ahead and rate and review us on your favorite podcast provider because that is the best way in the whole wide world to support us. But now's about time for our Patreon shoutouts. Jen, who do we have?
Well, we have the Ghost Story Guys.
Yay!
The ABV Network.
Yay!
Miss McNeil.
Yay!
And Miss Becca Sue.
Woo! So if you guys are interested in becoming a Patreon donor, then you are going to get access to recipes from the ex-bartender Jen.
Ex-bartender Jed.
That's her. An article's written by me in the Bourbon Zeppelin, and you're also going to get teaser trailer videos of new episodes coming out, plus many other benefits like this little roll call shout out that we did. So we also have our audio episodes now available on Spotify and on YouTube, along with all of our other usual places to find us. So if you have any would you rather questions or listener stories, we're gathering stories for next month's listener episode. So send us some goodies. We already have a couple of them and we love hearing from you. And if you want to find us on social media, Jen, where can people find us?
Oh, the old IG, Booze and Bourbon. You can also find us on Facebook, Booze and Bourbon the podcast. We also are on Twitter as well.
Yes, we are.
And
our email is boozeandbourbon, BOOSAND, bourbon @gmail.com. So thanks so much for listening today, guys, and we will have an all-new episode for you next Friday. Bye.
Thank you. Go suck some blood. Ooh, ah, ah, ah.
One, ah, ah. Two, ah, ah. God, we're crazy.
Booze and Bourbon is part of the ABV network. For more information or to advertise on the show, please head over to abvnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, and cheers.
This has been a Steve Akeley production.